Well, good morning. I, Chair Shelley Bailey, call the Prescription Drug Affordability Board meeting of February 19th, 2025 to order at approximately 9:02 a.m. Melissa, can you please call roll?
Chair Shelley Bailey,
Present.
Vice Chair Amy Burns is not here yet. We'll try again. Dan Hartung,
Present.
Lori Hoagland will be arriving shortly. Robert Judge,
Present.
Chris Lehman,
Present.
John Murray,
Present.
Dan Kennedy.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Melissa, thank you for taking the roll. Before we advance to the conflict of interest declarations, I do want to just mention to everyone here today that I have a sick 3-year-old here at home. So as much as I am committed to the work that we're doing here, I am a mother first. So if I am temporarily disrupted throughout this meeting, staff will help facilitate continuing the meeting in my absence. So I would now like to move on to see if any board members have any declarations of potential or actual conflict of interest related to meetings with entities or individuals related to board activities. If you provided testimony related to prescription drugs on the Oregon legislature, please also provide the committee name and date. As a note from PDAB policies and procedures, board members are to disclose at the beginning of each board meeting any meetings or work conducted with entities or individuals related to board activities since the last board meeting. This includes serving on other boards or committees. So with that in mind, it looks like we do have a couple hands raised. I believe, Mr. Murray, you had your hand raised first. So Mr. Murray, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I'll read my normal statement here for conflict of interest. Under advisement from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, I declare a potential conflict of interest due to my ownership of Murray Drugs, comprised of 3 independent pharmacies in Eastern Oregon that have pharmacy services contracts with PBMs, insurance companies in the state of Oregon. Using the language of the Ethics Commission, because the PDAB is an advisory board that simply provides information to others who have rulemaking authority, guidance from OJEC is that it appears that at most you would have a potential conflict of interest each time the PDAB meets to discuss a specific prescription drug or related matters. And Chair, I also did testify recently, and I'm sorry I don't have the date in front of me, with the House Committee on Behavioral Health and Healthcare on House Bill 3212. I did state that I was a PDAB board member for the sake of transparency, but I did clarify that I was testifying only as a private individual, a pharmacist, in favor of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for that information, Mr. Murray. Mr. Judge, I believe you had your hand raised next. Mr. Judge, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. For the record, I want to make a statement regarding potential conflicts of interest. I'm employed in the health insurance industry for Moda Health and also serve on this board. So due to these dual roles, it's possible that matters discussed by the board may present the appearance of a conflict of interest. And I also, from time to time, present as a representative of the insurance industry in front of the legislature. And on February 4th, I gave testimony in regard to 3212, House Bill 3212. That was the result of a PBM work group in which I participated on that was chaired by Representative Nose. I gave that testimony as a representative of the insurance industry. On February 4th, I was asked by one of the committee members about a matter before the PDAB concerning prescription drug reimbursement, and I made mention of the fact that that's a committee issue, and the committee is making these types of evaluations, but I gave no personal opinion on that. I want to confirm or affirm my commitment to really ethical conduct should any matter arise that in my judgment presents such an appearance. I'll fully disclose the relevant circumstances like I did with the House Health Committee and recuse myself from any discussion or vote on that specific issue in front of this board. I believe my experience in the health insurance sector brings a valuable perspective to this committee or this board, and I'm committed to ensuring my contributions are made with the utmost trust and transparency.
Mr. Judge, thank you for that information. Before we proceed with the agenda, and Mr. Judge, you can lower your hand if you would like. Just wanted to check and see if there's anyone else with anything that they would like to disclose. All right, well, moving forward, I would like to announce that the board will have an executive session on the topic of written legal advice concerning the affordability review process. The authority for the executive session is under ORS 192.6602F. The executive session will take place directly before the start of the agenda item called Board Review of Data Sets and OAR 925-200-0010 criteria for upcoming affordability reviews. So now moving forward, I would like to ask my colleagues today if they have any changes to the draft minutes from our January 15th, 2025 meeting. And if there isn't any proposed changes to that agenda notes, I would like to ask if we can have a motion to approve the minutes.
Chair Bailey, this is John Murray. I'll move approval of the minutes as presented, please.
Thank you for the motion.
Chair Bailey, this is Dan Kennedy. I will second.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. So Melissa, if you can please call roll to vote on the minutes, I would greatly appreciate it.
Dan Hartung,
Aye.
Lori Hoagland is on her way into the meeting. Robert Judge,
I was not able to participate in January's PDAB meeting, so I will abstain.
Dan Kennedy,
Aye.
Chris Lehman,
Aye.
John Murray,
Aye.
Vice Chair Amy Burns is not here yet, and Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa. I would now like to call on Executive Director Ralph Magrish to provide us with the program updates.
Thank you, Chair Bailey, and I'm noting for the record that we're just inviting and welcoming Board Member Lori Hoagland in. Lori, can we confirm that you can hear us and are with us?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Good morning, everyone. Just a few updates. Staff is working on the drug data and analytics request for information. As mentioned previously to the board, the timeline is as follows. February and March, staff and the department will be working with our procurement office to formally develop that. In April, we will bring it to the board for review, allowing some additional time in May if necessary for the board to review that RFI. For posting in June to solicit questions and clarifications and qualification from prospective vendors or interested parties, and we would share those responses in July. Secondly, just a very, very friendly reminder to all board members about legislative advocacy. We did send out a document from the governor's office in January titled Agency, Board, and Commission Legislative Engagement Policy. Just a handful of key reminders there. First, a board member may advocate on their own behalf as an individual, but should make sure not to blur the lines and suggest you speak on behalf of the board. Individuals in this situation should not assume that others are making that distinction. So proactively define the difference, please. For board members engaging with the legislature, please first communicate with me consistent with this statewide policy for boards and commissions issued from the governor's office. A couple more important notes. A board member must be empowered by the board to speak on the board's behalf as it relates to analyzing legislative proposals made by others. The board itself and individual board members, when acting as a body or as individuals under the auspices of this position, must obtain prior approval from the governor's office on the following. One, to take a public stance in favor of a bill or amendment, either in writing or verbal testimony or in one-on-one meetings with legislators. Secondly, in taking a public stance in opposition to a bill or amendment in writing via verbal testimony or one-on-one meetings with legislators. Following up on that, boards or individual board members, when acting as a body or individuals under the auspices of their position, do not, I repeat, do not need to obtain prior approval from the governor's office if they are offering technical assistance, which includes or involves their experience, expertise, data, or other information to legislators and other stakeholders when that feedback is requested in writing, via verbal testimony, or in one-on-ones with legislators, and or to discuss bill concepts as a group in their meeting. While prior authorization is not required to offer feedback or to discuss the bill or concept during an open meetings, board members should indeed notify myself or additional staff members. Clear as mud. So to that point, individual members, if you do have questions, please direct them to me, and we're happy to talk that through with you. Lastly, as I welcome Jesse O'Brien momentarily, we have seen one bill drop related to the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. House Bill 2599 was a pre-session filing by Representative Pham, which would direct the PDAB to develop a plan that consolidates and aligns the objectives of the PDAB and the Prescription Drug Price Transparency Program, also housed at DCBS, by December 15th of 2026. The board would be required to submit a report to the legislature. This bill was referred to the House Behavioral Health and Healthcare Committee with a subsequent referral to Ways and Means on January 17th. The bill does not have a hearing scheduled yet, so I will keep you posted on that. And finally, if I can, segueing in, I'd like to welcome Jesse O'Brien, our policy manager at the Division of Financial Regulation here at DCBS, to provide a legislative update to you. Thank you. Jesse, welcome.
Ralph, good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. So Chair, members of the board, I am Jesse O'Brien. I'm the policy manager with the Division of Financial Regulation. And we have a legislative update document that I intended to send out in advance of this, but wasn't able to get it fully across the line in time. So we'll be sending it after the meeting. My apologies for that. As usual, there's a great deal of legislative activity related to health and health insurance, health care, health topics, and a significant number of bills related to prescription drugs, some of which are directly relevant to the work of the board and many of which are not. But the document that we will be sending out and that's currently on share screen here is an overview of most of those. It actually does not include the bill that Ralph just mentioned due to a little technical oversight on my part. My apologies, but that's certainly an important bill for the future of this program that I would suggest that people keep an eye on. And then, you know, as far as hot topics here, I'm not planning on covering everything in this document because it's 3 pages long and there's a lot going on, but clearly a hot topic in the legislature this year, yet again, is going to be the regulation of pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. There's several bills related to making changes to the regulatory framework for them, which include things like creating a minimum dispensing fee or changing the kind of standard to which PBMs are held. And several other things. There's also a couple of bills that I wanted to mention. One of them is listed on the screen there, which is House Bill 2149. And then there's another bill, House Bill 3226, that relate to the regulation of what are called, Pharmacy Services Administrative Organizations, or PSAOs, which you all are probably more familiar with than I am, but they are generally intermediaries between a PBM and a pharmacy that work on behalf of the pharmacy. And there's one bill that would require these entities to be licensed with us, and another bill that similarly kind of increases regulation on them. And then another bill, if we could skip down to the second page here, that I wanted to cover was House Bill 3082, which would increase reporting to our drug price transparency program related to patient assistance programs offered by drug manufacturers. And this is roughly in line with a recommendation that our drug price transparency program has been making for many years now. And that bill is up for hearing next week. So that's definitely of interest and could have an impact on the board's work as well. And then the last specific bill I wanted to note, if we could move down to the final page, is this is a brand new bill just introduced yesterday, House Bill 3613, which would create a new Office of Pharmaceutical Purchasing within the Department of Administrative Services to kind of put all pharmacy purchasing and the Oregon Prescription Drug Program into a single entity that could coordinate its activities. This is also related to recommendations that the board and our drug price transparency program have made, although we've not been directly involved with crafting the bill, so I'm not sure how much it lines up with the discussions we've had at DCBS or with the board, but would definitely be a pretty significant change to how prescription drug purchasing is done in the state. And then beyond that, I don't necessarily want to get into individual bills unless people have questions, but there's a number of things here. I also didn't include a rather large number of bills related to the application of the corporate activity tax or CAT tax to drug purchasing and pharmacy activities. That's definitely important for costs in the supply chain in various ways, but it's kind of not core to the mission of the board, I would say. But if people are interested, there are several bills related to that topic. With that, that's everything I intended to talk about, but I'd be happy to take any questions or talk about any of the bills that I haven't specifically mentioned yet. Robert, please.
Thanks, Judge. Just a quick question, and it's one more about calendar. When are bills supposed to get out of policy committees this session?
Yes, so the key deadline that we usually think about is called the first chamber work session deadline, which is in early April. I'm going to need to look up exactly when it is, if I even have that written down somewhere.
That's fine. It's several months away. I think
Yeah, it's a ways away at this point.
Okay.
And it's far enough out that we don't have a great sense yet of what is really going to be moving forward.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Well, Jesse, thank you for providing us with that update. And again, I'd just like to lean into the information that Ralph shared with us earlier, that if anyone has any questions, any board members have questions prior to participating in the legislative process, please, I would just welcome everyone to please just communicate with staff. So just wanted to follow up related to that. So we are now moving on to the public comment portion of our agenda. The board received 11 comments, which are reviewed by the board and posted on our website. I'll now read the 11 public comments that we received written comment on, and then we'll move forward with the those that requested to speak. So the letters that we received were from Mary Watchter at Genentech, from Harry Gwanter at Let My Doctors Decide Action Network, Tiffany Westrick Robertson from the Patient Inclusion Council in each, she sent 2 letters. Melody Calkins from Biotech Innovation Organization Bio and Oregon Bioscience Association. Steve Newmark from Global Healthy Living Foundation. Madeline Feldman, MD, FACR from the Coalition of State Rheumatology Organizations. Scott Bertrani from Health HIV, Rainier Simmons from CAN, and Seth Grenier from the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and Marty Carty from OPCA. The board also received 6 requests to speak. I will call on those who signed up to speak and ask them to state their name and organization. Each will have 3 minutes to speak. As a reminder, the board will not deliberate on issues or requests during this time, and please again keep in mind the 3 minutes. The first individual I have on my list is Ms. Lauren Sant from Caring Ambassadors. Lauren, welcome, and you have the floor.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Lauren Sant. I'm the Executive Director of the Caring Ambassadors Program. I really thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I know you can't respond to my testimony, but I have some questions that I hope you will discuss during this meeting and before finalizing your review process. Regarding your patient information requests in your latest packet, you have a question there. Are therapeutic alternatives, for example, a different therapeutic agent for this drug available? Really? I dare you to walk out on the street and ask anyone in the general public what that means. If you're just trying to check a box and say you got patient input, send it out. If not, please rewrite this to the appropriate reading level. And I really suggest you review the suggestions from the PIC and the EACH Council from patients that really looked at this and have provided you just concrete examples of what this language should look like. At the top of the form, it states answers are not confidential, and if received by this date will be included in the board materials. But at the bottom, it says it's voluntary. Confidentiality has to be the only option here if you want patient information that's this personal. You can't say it's not confidential. I see no plan for outreach. How will this be distributed? Are you working with the CCOs to do patient outreach? Are you working with FQHCs, hospitals, physicians, pharmacists, advocacy groups? What's the plan? I don't see anything different from last year. I don't see how you're going to get any other information than what you got last time, which was not much. And lastly, will you include what the patients in the community have to say in your final report and executive summary to our legislators, or will you bury it in the end in a table? Thanks, and please consider my questions. Have a great day. Appreciate your work.
Thank you, Lauren. Next individual who signed up to testify is Ms. Tiffany Westrick Robertson from Patient Inclusion Council, AIA Arthritis, and EACH. Tiffany, welcome. You have the floor and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, I'm a patient living with non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. So I do represent 4 different groups today. And saying that, I just want to thank you all for this opportunity and for your willingness to collaborate with patients and caregivers. And also just a thank you for putting patient organizations on as a stakeholder group who can participate in lending information for patients. So a big thank you on that. As far as participating today, mostly as the Patient Inclusion Council, we are part of a broader coalition, but this coalition is patients and caregivers. All are invited. We ask everyone to speak their truth and leave their opinions on PDABs, pharmaceutical companies, or insurers at the table. This is about helping you understand the patient need and nothing else. We also are comprised of several patient research partners, including myself, with education and professional experience in research teams, and we have used those skills to help you in navigating the patient survey. I won't go over all of the edits and recommendations that is on the letter, but 85% of the questions we did have information from patients to help you to be able to collect the most robust information possible. And we do encourage you to reach out to us. We will help you to continue with your team to make sure that the questions are getting what you wanted. In addition to what Lauren said, we zeroed in a lot on the alternative therapies. We know that most patients, if you ask them about it, their first response will be to you, there is no such thing as a therapeutic alternative. What works for me should never be taken away. So I don't think you're going to get the information you want by asking it that way, but we do have some thoughts, and we'd love to help you with that. Also, there were questions about asking for patients, caregivers, and public. Just want to make sure we're really zeroing in on the patients and caregivers. Questions about dosage strength and frequency. Most patients think dosage is strength. So those are just some examples of clarification of content, and also just some specifics. I really wanted to know more about what the board's endpoints are in the analysis, particularly in expected outcomes. So there was a question on what are your expected outcomes of the treatment. Most patients will say to achieve remission. So knowing what it is that you're asking for is important. In summary, I'm not going to go into all of the edits, as I said, or recommendations. I did submit a very lengthy letter, and we are here to help you. That is our job. So I really hope that you'll consider our offer to work with you to make sure patients and caregivers' voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next on the agenda, we have Scott Bertrani from Health HIV. Welcome, Scott. You have the floor and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is Scott Bertani with Health HIV, and I'm a director of advocacy. And I apologize for some of the slurring. I've had some oral surgery, and I'm not on camera. But I hadn't prepared any oral testimony. I think I may have accidentally done that wrong. We submitted some written comments that we hope that we'll take into consideration. But really, at the heart of it, for our concerns here again, are ensuring that 340B issues that include beyond federally qualified healthcare centers, but also look into HRSA covered entities, that there is no issues with respect to how upper payment limits may actually affect the HIV ecosystem. There's so many complexities to this, and knowing that 340B reform at the federal level is probably on the near horizon. We're just very encouraged by the board to take a look at this 340B issue and to ensure that the HIV ecosystem and to ensure obviously that there are some differentiations between HIV as a communicable disease that has specificities towards it, but we also want to extend that conversation towards other orphan drugs that also have last line of defenses and treatments, that they don't get caught up into this. But sorry for that brief brevity. Thank you for your work again, and just honestly the work that you all do with the Oregon Health Authority and ensuring that OHA is paying attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Next on the list, we have Ms. Daria McGrew from Pharma. Ms. McGrew, welcome, and you have the floor and you have 3 minutes.
Chair Bailey, I believe that Eric, I don't see Daria here, but Eric, I believe is here. Eric, are you speaking instead of Daria today?
Okay, I had some challenges on my own in hearing you, but I believe you said that Ms. McGrew will not be testifying today, if I heard you correctly.
I don't, Ms. McGrew is not in the meeting, but Eric Loans is here. And Eric, are you speaking today instead of Daria?
Yeah, I'm not signed up to speak today.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. So
thank you. We do now have Nathan Salser, who is a consumer who signed up to testify. Nathan, if you are here, welcome. And you do have 3 minutes and you have the floor. Melissa, would you be able to confirm if Nathan Salser is in the meeting and if they would like to provide any public comment?
yes, Nathan is here. And Nathan, I did switch your settings, so you should be able to turn on your camera and use your mic right now. I just double checked your settings and you should be ready.
Melissa, I am not seeing him unmute. I'm going to try on my end.
So
Nope,
Nathan
it is saying need to ask for. Okay.
Yes,
Nathan, are you able to hear us or speak?
Maybe having some technical difficulties.
Well, I would say we do want to make sure that we hear the consumer feedback. I will go ahead and next invite Marty Carty, but if Mr. Salser is able to overcome some of those technical challenges, I'll go ahead and re-ask him after Marty Carty provides testimony. So Marty Carty, if you are here, welcome, and you have 3 minutes.
And Chair Bailey, Marty Carty is not in the meeting, is not here.
No problem. Then if we have not heard from Nathan Salser related to having the floor, go ahead and ping me. And at the end of the meeting, we'll go ahead and make time available so the individual can provide.
Chair Bailey, we have unmuted Nathan. Let's give one check. Nathan, are you able to join us? Nope. Okay. Appreciate Chair Bailey. We will circle back should either he or Marty Carty
Yes,
join us. Thank you.
please do. Thank you.
Chair Bailey, excuse me, Daria has just arrived.
Okay, since we are still actively during our public comment period, if Daria does want to provide public comment, she did sign up, and I would welcome Ms. McGrew to have the floor and have 3 minutes.
Okay, sorry, apologies for delayed getting on there. Thank you, Chair Bailey and members of the board, Daria McGrew on behalf of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. First, just want to state for the record that we will be submitting a letter after the meeting this month. I will highlight, preview what our comments will say, and we will follow up with a letter in the next couple of weeks. First, want to appreciate the changes the board is making by including the new RFIs, or request for information from various stakeholders. As we have advocated for a long time, the board should be doing more outreach and more listening to stakeholders. That being said, we do have a lot of concerns and think there needs to be more work done on these stakeholder RFI forms, or however they will be submitted. First, big problem is confidentiality. Much of the information being requested is highly confidential or sensitive, and the form specifically states upfront that the answers will not be kept confidential. The PDAB has a duty under the statute to protect confidential, trade secret, proprietary information from improper disclosure. Categorically deeming certain information as not confidential is not consistent with the statutory requirement. Additionally, I think it would have a chilling effect on stakeholder engagement. You're asking for voluntary information from lots of stakeholders, and just saying that names, personal information, and sensitive business information will not be kept confidential, will not promote stakeholders engaging. Secondly, as we have said previously, we would like more explanation on how the information compiled from these RFIs will be incorporated into the affordability review reports, how they will be used to interpret affordability or not affordability, and how they will be considered in the reviews. And finally, we think that throughout all of the forms, there need to be more clear definitions and clear methodology throughout. There's inconsistencies in references, for example, in pointing to therapeutic alternative on some forms. It points to the definition in your rules, and some forms it doesn't. That's just one example. We will submit some other. Also, some of the calculations you're asking for costs and rebates, and lots of things that can be calculated different ways. So all of the RFIs would benefit from much more clear definitions and methodology explained in what you're asking for. We will submit further discussion in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGrew. I did also notice that Marty Carty has joined the meeting. Marty, you did sign up to provide oral testimony. If you would like to do so today, you do have the floor, and you have 3 minutes. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you, Chair Bailey and board members. I'm Marty Carty, the Director of Government Affairs at the Oregon Primary Care Association, here today on behalf of Oregon's 34 federally qualified health centers. We did submit written comments to the board, and I would refer you to those for more robust understanding of my comments today. But I think in summary, what I'd like to point out for the board is we appreciate your focus on affordability reviews and understanding the impact that affordability choices that the board makes, policy decisions, may have on 340B covered entities like federally qualified health centers. We do have some concerns. In fact, the previous presenter highlighted a few of them, namely, the statement that material submitted in the RFI is subject to public display. Some of the questions are clearly asking for too much information or information that could lead to unfair contracting practices with payers or drug manufacturers. Our comments, I've listed a number of our concerns and also suggestions for changes that should happen. I would highlight that questions 6 and 11 are the two that caused us the most concern in terms of the sensitive information that we would not want reported publicly. I will also highlight that it's unclear to us which covered entities are considered safety net providers. We believe that all covered entities in the state should be subject to this RFI. And also, we've suggested that the board take a larger view of covered entities' use of 340B savings rather than focusing on a small subset of the formulary or drugs that FQHCs dispense under the program. I'll conclude my comments there, and I appreciate the board's time.
Marty, thank you for your comments. Melissa, I would like to circle back and see if Nathan Saucer is available at this moment, and if Nathan would like to provide any public comment.
Chair Bailey, Nathan is no longer in the meeting.
Okay, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. I would now like to proceed to board review and vote on the amended conflict of interest policy 3 and the PDAB policy and procedures 1. I would like to invite Courtney Whitlock, senior policy analyst. Last month, the board voted to approve amended policies 1, 2, and 4. The board asked staff for a legal review of the conflict of interest policy 3 and to bring the policy back to the board for the review today. Additionally, the board will review the amended policy 1 for approval. So Courtney, welcome. You have the floor, and if you could help us through this discussion. The other thing I will add is that we will take a 5-minute break around 10:30 to 10:45 a.m. So Courtney, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I'm going to take a moment and share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen. So again, we're bringing back policy number 1, which is the policies and procedures that govern the PDAB work. The conflict of interest discussion, this statement had been originally asked to be put into conflict of interest policy, but after review with DOJ, it was determined to be better suited under the general policy that governs the board work due to how the policy voting requirement is for this section. So basically, and some language had been changed from the original suggestion by Chair Bailey last month. This was the suggested language by the attorneys, which is when a board member abstains from voting on any matter or section under consideration, the declaration of abstention may include a brief explanation such as potential conflict of interest or other relevant reason to ensure transparency and maintain trust in the decision-making process. So again, this is kind of different than the original language that Chair Bailey had suggested, but it still meets the intention of abstaining if there's a potential. Question to the board is, does the verbiage meet the intention of what the board is wanting from the original discussion from last month, or do we want to work on this a little bit more? I do have that language from last month if the board would like to review that. Chair Bailey, I see your hand up, yeah.
Courtney, since I did propose the original language, sorry for my coworker here, who's my 3-year-old in the background. From my perspective, the language that you've put forth in this draft is in alignment with the intention of the language that I had originally proposed.
Okay, wonderful. Any other feedback or suggestions from board members before? Yes, Chris, I see your hand up.
Chair Bailey, I just had a question for you, if I may. We had talked last time, at least in my recollection, about if you knew that you were going to abstain from something, that we would let the group know before the discussion about the item happened. Is that just an expectation, or is it fine to wait until the actual vote is happening to let the group know that you have a conflict?
I'm glad that you mentioned that. From my perspective, the intention had been to ask people to disclose that at the beginning of the section in discussion, meaning the individual would be welcome to actively participate in the discussion, but disclose at the beginning of the section their intention to abstain. I know other board members had other opinions related to that. And we were trying to allow some grace that if someone maybe didn't initially abstain or didn't think they had a reason to abstain, but then throughout the discussion did determine a reason to abstain, that they might not always disclose it at the beginning for circumstances maybe that were unforeseen, but certainly the intention was to ask individuals to disclose it at the beginning of the section. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I do see John has his hand raised, but Ralph, it does seem as though you probably want to add something to the discussion at this moment. So Ralph, you have the floor.
Let me invite John. He had his hand up first. Thanks, Chair Bailey.
Oh, I was just going to comment to Chris that for me, it depends whether it's an actual conflict or a potential conflict of interest. You know, potential, we can still deliberate and vote. But if it's an actual, according to the state of Oregon, where there's a monetary, for example, recompense to the person concerning the drug under discussion, then I would say no discussion and it needs to be announced ahead of time. Yeah.
And Mr. Murray, I think from my perspective, the intention was actually almost broader than a conflict of interest. When we had discussed last time was that people may have reasons for abstaining from voting that aren't related to a conflict of interest, but are just personal, related to their own decision to abstain. So from my perspective, that was kind of more what the language was related to.
Okay.
Dr. Hartung?
Oh, I just wanted to, I think it's also important to disclose actual or potential or perceived. I mean, I think that all these potential conflicts of interest, even if they aren't actual conflicts of interest, may erode public trust. So I think that while there is a distinction between the two from a public facing perspective, I think both types are relevant.
Yeah, and that again is kind of why DOJ suggested putting the this language in the standard policy and not just under the COI. So it's a little, or it covers more broad spectrum of the need to abstain if needed. And Robert, I saw your hand up first. And this Ralph has a.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I wasn't in last month's meeting, so I didn't get the benefit from the deep discussion that took place on this. But in reading the language that is worded, I think this is getting at an objective that I think would be useful and helpful to keep and ensure kind of public trust in the openness in which our proceedings occur. The thing that strikes me here is it's left to the board member to make that determination because it's may versus must, which I think gives flexibility to the board member in making that decision, because one of the facts that we're all dealing with, and I think we're all potentially susceptible to this, we are all experts in our area and all have some relevancy on this topic, and that could create perceptions of conflicts of interest because of our expertise that we're bringing into this. So it's a really fine line to walk, and I think it's left to the board member to, with kind of a focus on ensuring integrity in the process, to kind of inspect themselves in their decisions and then making the determination whether they need to disclose and why.
Yeah, and that was essentially, Mr. Judge, what the focus of last discussion was. So that's why we use the language may. But back to Mr. Lehman's question about the specifics of when someone did that. Ralph, do you have specific feedback related to that?
I just want to note, broadly speaking, that this policy change does not change the requirements under the conflict of interest policy already, which is to report and recuse when related to relevant or appropriate conflict of interest, and that those are dictated by statute, ethics laws, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that provides the overarching framework. And that's it, Chair Bailey. Thank you.
Thank you. But I don't want to lose sight of Mr. Lehman's comment about my understanding is the intention of the discussion that we did have in the last meeting was that we were going to ask someone to disclose that at the beginning of the relevant section. Did we receive any feedback related to why that specific piece was omitted? Or maybe I'm missing it in the language, but yeah, to Chris's point, I don't see that we've specified when we would like someone to do that. Was that due to guidance we received, or was that just kind of keeping the language brief and concise?
I think it's to provide a little broader, because again, if the discussion happens and you don't realize that you're ready to abstain from the very beginning, so you start having a conversation and you realize that there may be.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I guess my ask of the board was, I believe our intention was that under normal circumstances, we would really hope our peers are disclosing it at the beginning of the relevant section, and that in the very rare use cases where someone may make a real-time decision about their voting, that they would disclose it at the end. But certainly the intention of the discussion was that someone, from my perspective, my understanding was that the intention was for someone to disclose it at the beginning, so that colleagues were aware of that as we were having our discussions. So do we have any flexibility in trying to add that back in while keeping it flexible, that it's not must, like, so that if someone did in a rare circumstance change their mind on the fly, that they still have the grace to do that?
We certainly can workshop this. Recollection was that it was not substantively removed by council, and that was a board decision, and that members wanted to be able to discuss and only recuse for a vote. So to the point that other folks made, everyone is here with good intentions to help inform conversation, and if someone were to a board member were to go down that path in the spirit and intent of good faith of helping to inform a decision, and then realized that they were perhaps uncomfortable in a voting role in that spirit of transparency, then I think the conversation was that they should still be able to declare that their intent to recuse themselves, rather than to firewall them from the entirety of the conversation. So long-winded way of saying that if this still needs, or the board wishes to wordsmith or workshop this, it's certainly your prerogative to do so.
Thank you. To be clear, my intention, and I don't believe the intention of our last discussion was for anyone to be firewalled. It was to ensure everyone actively participate, but if they were intending on abstaining, that they could let their colleagues know at the beginning of the section. That was my understanding, I think, of it. Can I ask any other board members' opinion? Mr. Judge, your hand is raised. So Mr. Judge, you have the floor.
Yeah, I guess, again, apologize because I wasn't here last month, but to what purpose does this achieve? What purpose does that achieve? This really comes down to abstention from a vote, and whether you declare that ahead of time or right preceding a vote is really based upon either facts known before you get into discussion or facts learned as you go through the discussion. I don't know what purpose it achieves. I'm not opposed to the idea. I'm just don't know what purpose it achieves by making
Mr.
that
Judge,
declaration ahead of time.
I shoot straight, so I'll shoot straight right now. My understanding of why we were having that discussion was to truly encourage board members to ensure moving forward that we really are voting, on different topics as we advance, and not leaning into abstaining unless there was truly a reason why, so I mean, from my perspective, that was why we were having the discussion as we continue the difficult work that we do, but the very important work that we do. I think the intention of that truly was to make sure that as board members, we are actively engaged, and that we are actively voting essentially yes or no on things that we are working on. And that's not a statement targeted at any board member, but just a statement helping us advance our meaningful discussions. Because I think that the core of the discussion was that if a board member is a subject matter expert. We all are subject matter experts. We very much want everyone's professional opinion, but some professional opinions, obviously we all have our own perspective, guide things in one way. But if someone isn't going to vote at all, we would like the board member in that specific session to at least disclose at the beginning, I'm actively participating, using my expertise, but I will be abstaining from the vote. And we are just asking that our colleagues, as professional courtesy, do that. But we do have lots of other important work to do during this. So can we just have like a little bit of feedback from other members as to if this is the language we would just like to keep, or if this is something we would like to bring back to the table during our next meeting? Does anyone have any personal thoughts related to that? Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bailey. I personally am comfortable with this language. I agree with Board Member Judge that I don't know that it accomplishes a lot, but I believe that we would have the right to recusal regardless of what our views were. So I'm okay. I'm comfortable with this language.
All right, well, I don't see any other hands raised related to this specifically. I don't know, Courtney, if we need to call a vote on this specific piece, or if you had more to review before we called a vote.
Yeah, so we'd have to vote for the update to policy 1. So just a quick statement from the board, or disclaimer to change the policy to the updated language, vote on that, and then we'll cover the COI form, or the conflict of interest policy and form, just once this vote is gone through.
Thank you for the guidance. So do we have a motion to approve the language that's before us right now in its current form? I see 2 hands raised. Ms. Hoagland, I think yours was up first, so you have the floor. Although we cannot.
I move to approve the new language that we have presented today to the policy.
Mr. Kennedy, your hand is also raised. Do you have the floor?
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I would second that motion to approve this amendment as listed today.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Melissa, can you please call roll?
Dan Hartung,
Aye.
Lori Hoagland,
Aye.
Robert Judge,
Aye.
Dan Kennedy,
Aye.
Chris Lehman,
Aye.
John Murray,
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Melissa, thank you.
All right, thank you, board members. Appreciate that. We'll get that updated up on the website shortly after the meeting. So last month, the conflict of interest policy was not voted on due to the potential changes in the language. The language was removed, and so it still is set with additional updates, just basically around like really small edits. Yeah, I think like this is the primary edit here under C. It says a conflict of interest disclosed under this discussion shall be posted on the board website, and the board meeting. The board chair may recuse the member for any final discussion resulting from a review of a prescription drug. So just making sure that we're including this last little bit of language. And then we had a couple items that were removed. So if the board is okay with just these small edits, the board can put forth a motion to vote, and then we can discuss the form. Mr. Kennedy, I see your hand up.
Yes, I would motion for approval as amended.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Hoagland, you have the floor. You're also on mute.
I think she's trying to unmute.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Melissa, can you please call the roll?
Dan Hartung,
Aye.
Lori Hoagland,
Aye.
Robert Judge,
Aye.
Dan Kennedy,
Aye.
Chris Slayman,
Aye.
John Murray,
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right, thank you. So for the form, the conflict of interest form, again, we'll have to have a vote for the form. Once this form is also approved, this form will be sent out to board members for your annual participation in filling out the form and sending it back to staff so that we have the most current update on this information. There was no significant changes except for, I think, 2 words at the top. Yep, and that was it. So if the board wants to pass a motion to update the couple terms, and then we will send this out to board members to fill out.
Chair Bailey, I'll move to approve the conflict of interest form revision as presented today, please.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Do we have a second?
This is Board Member Kennedy. I would second.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Melissa, if you could please call roll.
Dan Hartung,
Aye.
Lori Hoagland,
Aye.
Robert Judge,
Aye.
Dan Kennedy,
Aye.
Chris Slayman,
Aye.
John Murray,
Aye.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, now make sure my fuck you. I would like to mention that we have now moved into this section of our agenda related to board review of annual generic. Oh, Mr. Judge, you have your hand raised before I.
That was a mistake.
Oh,
I must have.
Wanted to interrupt me reading my text, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, we will move forward. We are now going to move to the portion of our agenda related to the board review of the annual drug report outline. ORS 646A.697.2 requires PDAB to prepare an annual report about generic drugs. Today, the board will discuss topics to include in the report. I will turn it over to Courtney Whitlock, Senior Policy Analyst, to help us with this discussion.
Again, Chair Bailey, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do it from a PowerPoint from the PDF because my PowerPoint will not share correctly. So again, at that point of the year, we had to start setting up for the generic drug report. Under our statute SB 844, we covered the standard process or topics regarding price generics year over year. And again, this is all throughout the United States market for generic drugs, the degree of which generic drug price impact insurance premiums, annual changes to health insurance costs and sharing, potential for and the history of generic drug shortages, and then the degree of which generic drug price affects annual spending in the state medical assistance program. Staff is working on collecting the information for this to do the write-ups. For F, any other topics to consider? Staff has kind of pulled together some recommended topics that I would like to ask the board if they would have any interest in including in the generic drug report. Additionally, as we have this discussion, due to the restraint of having to stay on top of the affordability review process and doing the other review for the write-ups, staff would like to ask board members for whatever sections are selected here to participate in the write-ups of them. So with that, showing on this screen and then on this screen, and hopefully the board members have already reviewed the topics, or if you have any other topics that you'd like to maybe see in this report this year, please let staff know and we will get things set up. Mr. Robert, I see your hand raised.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, just to be clear, these are the mandatories are what you just showed in statute. These are optional if we elect to include that, and I guess the rationale would be to include one or more if we thought that would enhance the quality of the report to the legislature. Is that the way to think about this?
Yes, exactly. So again, here under F, any other topics the board considers relevant to the cost of generic drugs.
Mm-hmm. And in the to your statement that you'd want to solicit board members to help draft these pieces, is it essentially if I say, well, let's go after this topic, that essentially it's Robert Judge is saying he's going to drop this topic, or is it board kind of says, hey, that's a good topic or not, and I can help or not help, or is that one of the objectives of this discussion?
Well, the objective would be if the board agreed on a topic that hopefully volunteers would participate. I don't want to have to volunteer anybody to help, kind of thing, but staff will need help just to support the additional work that we're already doing.
Yeah.
So that would just be the intention.
Okay.
Does that clarify what you're asking?
Yeah, it did. And I'm trying to think about kind of each one of these topics because they're all kind of important in their own right. But I'm trying to think of how would they inform, kind of in light of, because we've done these reports several times, how would they inform a kind of the legislature and a legislative discussion? You know, there are other topics that may be just as germane or maybe even more informative to the board, to the board and to the legislature, that we might want to consider in addition to these. But trying to think through whether to make a recommendation on an additional or not. So I'll hold that fire on that for now.
All right. John, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Yes. I guess I would suggest PBM practices as something that if the board feels in consensus that it's a topic that should be addressed in the generic drug report, I would be willing to volunteer to help draft some language that, with the approval of the PDAB board, of course, not just my words, but staff and board approval, be included in the report. My intent is not to place only my opinion of PBM practices in the report. I would, though, and maybe this is not the place to mention it, but I'm in regards to this, maybe later in the meeting, I'd like to make a request that we have information presented to the PDAB board, maybe when we're not under a crush of jobs that we have right now, but before the end of the year and we vote on suggestions to the legislature, I would like to have other states come and present to us what PBM reforms or practices they've addressed in their states and the results that have come up. Oregon does not have to reinvent the wheel for possibly modifying the drug delivery system in the state in order to realize savings to patients. So I'll also ask this later in the meeting, but anyway, I would volunteer to work on the PBM practices section should the board feel it's necessary.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Chair Bailey, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. And leaning into what Mr. Murray said, I think one very specific use case that would be in alignment with the topic of the generic drug report would be PBM private label of biosimilars. Obviously, the biosimilar market, there's very many kind of high cost and generics that could be part of that. So shining light on some of what's going on in the market related to PBM's private labeling the biosimilars and generics themselves, I would welcome my own personal participation working with staff and with, I guess, Mr. Murray, because that could fall under, it could be a subsection of anything related to PBMs and generic medications.
Okay. Robert.
Yeah, just going in a slightly different direction, not dismissing at all the two prior comments from Chair Bailey and Mr. Murray. But I'm thinking about what Mr. Murray said about, learning from what others are doing. And if we think about state policies on the generic drug marketplace, I can think of multiple examples where some states are doing some really innovative things that might be informative to our legislature, like what Vermont's doing with importation. Now, it's not implemented yet, but it's certainly something that they have on their books that they're working to do. Maryland's anti-price gouging law on kind of how drug pricing on generics are affecting consumers in the marketplace. California and Washington's exploration of generic drug manufacturing, setting up those capabilities. Those are all, I think, really good policy and meaty topics that I've not seen our state even talk about before. that might be informative to the legislature. I understand PBM practices are like on everybody's mind. It's as we heard from Jesse earlier, it's a dominant part of the legislative slate this year. So I'm not sure we're going to inform ourselves more, but there's, like the topic that I just suggested would really, I think, be somewhat informative to our legislative process and to the board more generally.
Yeah, I took some notes on what you were saying there, Robert. I'm gonna see what Lori has to state, and then Dan.
So in addition to what's already been brought up, a couple of things from a provider perspective. Drug shortages can be incredibly disruptive and often come up without a lot of preparation for. So I would say that would be helpful. And international pricing, I know we have the most expensive healthcare system and some of the worst outcomes. So I think it's always helpful to know what's going on other places. And then my third one would be the tariffs, just because we don't know if that will be a problem or not, but I think we should be tracking it.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate your feedback. Dr. Hartung?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I support what Robert Judge has advanced in terms of providing some summaries of what other states are doing in this front as lessons learned. I have some concerns just with this whole enterprise in terms of the opportunity cost on other activities that we have on tap for this year. So I don't want this to just like consume a lot of our time. I don't know, the value add of this report from the legislative perspective. So I just want to raise that concern as well from staff and board member time.
Absolutely. And that's why, again, we as staff understand the constraints already for the other portions that we have to set up. If there are additional topics, working as a board together with staff, that support is really needed. We've made the recommendation to remove this from the middle of the year because it greatly impacts the rest of the affordability review process and getting things set up and making the decisions for the drugs and stuff like that. So, but we have to still maintain the statutory requirement until we get direction from any legislators that we can change to either the end of year or the impact of how the generic drug topic should be provided to legislators. So, Chair Bailey, I wanted to give you an opportunity to provide the feedback. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. It's been a rough day. I did want to lean into what my colleague said. I do want to remind all of us that it's not mutually exclusive, right? So from my perspective, if there's board members that do feel strongly about topics and they're willing to collaborate actively with staff. So it sounds to me like many of the things we've discussed today, if there's board members who are passionate and are very willing to work actively with staff, I would want to make sure we don't exclude things. My understanding is that generics are still, over 90% of the drugs dispensed on a unit level. So I think they're still very meaningful. But so from some of the topics my colleagues have said, if they're willing and able to champion providing staff with the crux of the medication of the content that our colleagues can then review, I do think there's a lot of things going on in the market, to reference what Mr. Judge and others have said. And I think it would be important to continue to do that if the board members are willing to champion the sections.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Appreciate the support. John Moraes, your hand up.
Yeah, I just was going to also add something similar to that, all the topics that were mentioned are worth investigating and looking into. And if board members are interested in drafting information on those topics, that's great. We can certainly bring them up for discussion next month. One last comment is, though, that I would say in reference to Mr. Judge's comments, some of the states' experience now is presenting data. It's not conjecture. It's not maybe generic states making generic drugs would help. It's actually changes that have been made. and results and savings, or not. So that's the reason for my request on that topic. Thank you.
Yes, Dan Kennedy.
Yes, I'd just like to echo what Board Member Hoagland said. I think it was announced yesterday that they're considering tariffs on imported drugs and considering that the vast majority of our generic drug supply are imported from other countries. I think that watching tariffs and how that's going to play out on cost of generic drugs is going to be important. The other one that I have to say is, I don't know if it fits in this area, but I'll try to say this nice. Patent extension practices by brand name manufacturers to ensure their marketplace when a drug becomes generic or a biosimilar becomes generic, how they position themselves with perhaps 180-day exclusivity to manufacture a generic drug and maintain price points might be interesting as well.
I appreciate the conversation from the board members. One of the things we have to maintain is the timeline. So this report is due on June 1st, which means the board has to finalize it by the May board meeting, which means that you have to also see the draft report by April, which gives staff pretty much only 6 weeks or so to put together the rest of this report, and then apply edits through April for the final to be in May. So again, this is a very tight timeline. I'm trying to get this in front of you as the board to make some sort of guidance. Again, I hear you guys have all expressed some great ideas and interest in what can be included in the report on top of the already required. So I don't know if we want to turn the conversation to what the board wants to see as an essential topics for it, and kind of because we have to be mindful of the time. I think I allotted like 15 minutes for this conversation, and we do really need to start reviewing the other drugs under the affordability review. And I want to make sure we have enough time to cover all the other topics because we still have the RFIs to discuss too. So any feedback from the board on essential topics that you want to start helping staff work on?
Mr. Judge, your hand is raised.
Good.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. In light of what Courtney just said, and kind of the concern that was expressed by Dr. Hartung, I do think there's meat in all these topics, but it might not be the right time for any of these to be incorporated into a report that's due June 1, where we're now just trying to talk about whether there are ideas that we want to kind of lean into and add to that. I kind of like the idea of maybe tabling these ideas, and if we get legislative approval to fold it into a year-end report, and then after this, I don't know when it would probably be for next year. I think that would give us a runway to do one or more of these to supplement what we're doing in our generic report if we still have to provide that, and do a quality job. Any one of these topics I think could be informative and helpful, but maybe the timing's just not right. So that's kind of where my head is now, notwithstanding the idea that I thought was a good idea.
Thank you, Robert. Any other feedback from board members? Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I mean, I respectfully somewhat disagree with Mr. Judge. I do understand the complexity and limited timeline, but I don't want to kind of wash our hands of the generic marketplace. That's what it kind of feels like a little bit, and that we would, in theory, be advancing something that might be very similar to what we've advanced before. I'm not suggesting that staff go down a deep dive of something while we also have other very meaningful work, but I would say that if there are board members that want to provide content for a limited section, and that we do provide our colleagues with the appropriate timeline, meaning like something for next month, that we give our colleagues the appropriate time to review. I wouldn't want to pass on the opportunity of actually addressing some real-time things that are going on in the marketplace, because otherwise, you know, we miss identifying and providing that information to policymakers for 12 months. So that, I mean, that would just be my own personal opinion, but it looks like there's others with their hands raised.
Yeah, John, I see your hand.
I guess I would just echo your thoughts, Chair Bailey. There are changes that happen throughout the year and information that is learned nationwide and in Oregon on some of these practices that legislators are going to have no idea of. And so as long as board members are willing to submit information for approval by the board, of course, not submitted individually, it would be a consensus of the group. So I don't see a problem with board members working to advance some of these topics should they have an interest.
John, Dr. Hartung.
I was just glancing at our the 2024 report to see what, you know, how much of it, like some of the stuff has been covered in our 2024 report. And maybe like if we just selected 2, maybe 3 topics that are, if you know, we're going to be intentional about putting something useful together, 2 or 3 really high value topics, you know, that we could focus on. I don't know if there's a way to, maybe if we could vote on maybe at some point on what the top 2 or 3 things we could like put together for the 2025 report. Maybe that would be a way forward. I don't know. Again, I do have concerns about this just eating up a lot of staff and board member time versus, you know, when we, you know, try to move to the affordability reviews. So
Oh, I appreciate that, Dan. I really do. Hear from Ralph, and then I'll ask a different question.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to recognize and appreciate what Dr. Hartung said as our healthcare economist here in using the term opportunity cost. I would ask the board not to lose sight of that, and that we are here to serve you. But with that said, the competing priorities of that are eminently before us in terms of selecting drugs, conducting affordability reviews, having meaningful engagement and outreach to constituents and interested parties. To that point, candidly, also noting that this report will be due June 1st, and the legislature will adjourn by the middle of June. So not diminishing the importance or utility of this report, but noting that I would anticipate most policy decisions will be well wrapped at that point in session. So would ask the board to contemplate how we proceed with this judiciously, I guess, and I would lean into the proposal that maybe board member Hartung made about identifying 2 or 3 and scoping around that and providing meaningful information to the legislature around those. And then to the other points noted, if our recommendations are adopted, to be able to incorporate richer detail into specific drug affordability reviews next year. Thank you, Chair Bailey. Thank you, Courtney.
All right, thanks, Ralph. So oh, Chair Bailey, do you want to respond or?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to say, if we were headed toward limited number of topics, I would certainly like to put my name in the hat for providing some information on PBM-owned generic companies and how that impacts the supply chain.
Yeah, so as we've been having this discussion, I've been kind of keeping tally on topics that have been brought up. PBM, whether it's under the PBM practices and kind of having subsections under that, kind of what you were just saying, Chair Bailey, there have been 2 strong opinions about that, 3 strong opinions about tariffs, and 2 around kind of what's going on with the international imports. Also have talked about anti-gouging, shortages, what other states are doing, and patent expiration practices, along with what is displayed on these 2 slides. So kind of what I'm seeing is tariffs, PBMs, and international kind of practices have been kind kind of the forefront of most of this conversation. I don't know if the board want to kind of dive from there, or if there's any other topics that the board wants to have a consistence on. The one thing is we don't have to vote on any of these. We don't want to vote. We just need the guidance of what the topic should be. But we should have a census across the board, kind of it's what the board wants in the report. And then again, any volunteers who would want to help write those sections. Dr. Hartung, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so in terms of timeliness, obviously the tariff thing is certainly a timely and hot topic. And a related issue, I also have I don't know if this has been written about, but I have concerns about the kind of regulatory oversight of generic manufacture or just manufacturing plants as well in terms of the scope of the FDA. Maybe that could be bundled into that as well. But importation, I see that, state importation, I see that more as like a brand name issue and not really a generic issue. So I think that might, limit the utility there in the generic specific report. And then, some of this stuff I think has been covered in our previous report. I'm just flipping through that right now, but some of the kind of the patent delay stuff. So maybe that's
Some
in
of
the
these
list.
topics have been discussed prior. What we do is we just feed off of that and kind of do like a follow-up of anything, if there's any data that was provided under those sections in any other prior report. So
Yeah, whatever we can repackage from the other prior one, that's
so just in the interest of time to keep this moving forward, tariffs seem to be a strong opinion, and PBM practices. Does the board want to at least have a census of those two topics to bring forward? We can discuss a third one if you want, but before I make any other final notes, how does the board feel about tariffs and the PBM practices? Robert, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and this would have to lean heavily into Dr. Hartong's expertise, but we know that tariffs are a topical item today, but from my perspective as a board, I'm not sure I would put our teeth into that because it's mostly just darkness on the horizon that we're hearing it about. I'm not sure how we'd actually write a meaningful report around it, although I do think it would be impactful should those come to bear, especially if you look at where generics are sourced, primarily from manufacturing perspective. On the PBM side, I think there's that ground is well trod. There's probably additional insight that we can provide as a board on that topic. I do think the topic that Chair Bailey highlighted about kind of ownership of generic manufacturers from PBMs is kind of that'd be a new topic to explore from my knowledge perspective. So I can get behind that type of idea.
All right, thanks, Robert. John.
Yeah, I think the PBMs, given the number of bills that are in the Oregon legislature and in the federal Congress, PBMs are a topic worth going into, where it's private labeling of biosimilars or generic companies owned by PBMs. These are all things that could be included in that brief section on PBM practices regarding generic drugs. So I would like to advocate for that.
Okay. Dr. Hartung.
Yeah, I support that. I think having like a very focused PBMs section that's again focused on the generic market, I think would be useful.
Okay.
That covers all these different things that we've discussed, the private label stuff or PBM owned generics, things like that.
All right. So at least we have one topic. Chair Bailey.
Oh, and I was just going to lean into what Dr. Hartung said, that maybe keeping it or trying to be focused on it. And, maybe even we're working on the discussion of high cost generics and things, right? Something that's meaningful to inform the legislature as they continue to do their work.
Okay. And Lori?
I guess I would still like to encourage us to include a section on importation of medicines, which would incorporate potentially tariffs, would incorporate some of the shortages or a result of that. Some of the issues. I realize that in the next month and a half, there may not be a lot of change. That may take longer, but I think it's important to include it in the report.
Chair Bailey?
And I can see, I would be willing to help assist related to that specific piece. My personal knowledge is more related to the FDA's opinion on personal importation. What are some of the employers doing in the importation space? What are different states who do have the authority? I believe there's 6 states that do. So I could lean into being helpful, not to suggest that I'm overall an expert, but I could certainly be helpful related to that and related to PBM owned generics.
Well, it sounds like we got a couple of primary topics, which is the tariffs with subtopics. So we have tariffs and PBMs and then the subtopics. What I can do is put together a little list of what the focus from this conversation is and send it out to the board members, and then whoever wants to volunteer to provide feedback. And again, most of the report information we try to provide high level with articles behind them and some so it doesn't have to be like a 3-page write-up, just the essential information with references, supporting references. So we have 2 topics for sure with subtopics. Is there anything else that we wanted to kind of capture, or we can put something together and then kind of have communication via some of the board touch bases and emails?
I'm good.
Look good. All right. Thank you so much. I'll get some information put together and sent out to you for everybody to review, and then you can provide me any other feedback on that. But I appreciate the conversation today on this.
Thank you, Courtney. I do think the timing of this discussion works perfectly for us to have our 5-minute break. So I would like to announce that we will be having a 5-minute break, and so we will see everyone here back shortly.
If we can have board members come on camera so we can get a quick roll call to who's all on, and then we can get going to the next section. I just want to be mindful of time for these next couple of sections so we can dive into the affordability review process.
And Courtney, as soon as you or Melissa could confirm that we do have quorum, then I'll just go ahead and announce the next section.
Quorum.
Yes, we do have quorum, Chair Bailey.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. So we're now moving forward with our board discussion of the affordability review request for information. The board will request information from people and organizations impacted by the board's affordability review prescription drug and insulin lists. The form will include the board's prescription drug list once the board has approved it. We will post the final version of the forms on the PDAB website and send links via email. Today, the board will talk about the draft forms, which are designated specifically for each of the following groups: individuals with scientific or medical training, including medical providers, pharmacists, professors, etc., manufacturers, patients, caregivers, advocacy groups, and the general public, pharmacy benefit managers, safety net providers, which include 340B covered entities. So I would now like to call on Ms. Courtney Whitlock, Senior Policy Analysis, to help guide us through this discussion. Courtney, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bailey. Appreciate the time to discuss this with the board. I also want to just take a moment to state my appreciation for everybody who provided feedback on these forms. This is just a really rough draft of what the staff had kind of conceptualized, what would be needed to apply some of this information into the material packets that the staff develops for board once the subset drugs are selected. So if you recall, last year we started these packets that are specific for each drug that is selected. And this was one of the challenged areas of that packet. We have suggested doing the request for information to obtain additional information through stakeholders. And so this is just kind of the outline of what we were meeting to, because under our Rule 20, we have specific requests under each of these sections, which are highlighted within the forms. And we just wanted to kind of capture those more clearly along with any additional information. So all the public comments, all the board feedback, again, they will be reviewed and better structured and implemented before these go out. And the intention is to have these go out at the same time after the subset list is selected. We're sending out a data call to carriers, and these will go out around the same time and with the expectation of the same timeline, about 3 to 4 weeks for return. So starting off for the individuals and scientific and medically trained individuals, really just capturing again what the outline was for Rule 20. I'll go, oops, apologies. I will pop this into a different screen. So under Rule 20, under this section of obtaining stakeholder feedback. So that includes patient and caregivers to seek input from patients and caregivers, the impact of the disease, patient treatment preference, perspective of the benefit and disadvantages of the prescription drug, and any additional information from caregivers. This is all associated under these referenced rules. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through each one of these since board members already participated in some level with staff on the development of these, but is there anything specific for this RFI that board members would like to provide staff? Otherwise, again, with the feedback from the public and some of the feedback from board members, staff will go and create red lines and make the changes and bring this back for next month to discuss with any edits. And let me share real quick. Apologies for jumping in and not sharing. And again, this is the rule. Individuals, caregivers, so the impact of the disease, perspective, benefit. And Chris, yeah, I see your hand up.
Is there anything in the rule, Courtney, that states that the information provided by the people filling this out, it has to be public information? I think Marty's concern earlier and some others who raised concern about it being public information and their names and information being shared. Is that something we decided as a board or something that's required by the statute?
There's no statutory requirement. It is just in the form of transparency, the information, because these are being just wanting to make sure that the information submitted. I think because of the intention of quite a bit of information coming in, most of it would probably be kind of aggregated or snapshot to put into the material forms to show like where the drug has the impact, but then also making the feedback kind of public. So if somebody wanted to reference it or we have to reference it in the report, then the full document is accessible kind of thing. It is our intention. We were speaking with DOJ about, changing quite a bit of the intention around confidentiality. So we're going to look into that a lot more closely and probably change some of that. Again, this is kind of the first initial push out and obtaining feedback and making these corrections to make sure that this document is going to be utilized and the individuals who fill it out feel supported in doing so. Yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
And Courtney, I do want to thank you for clarifying that, because obviously we do listen to public comments as well as that of our colleagues. I mean, I do want to mention that during our listening sessions that I actively and Vice Chair Burns participated in, throughout the state, we did have a way of, receiving information, but also de-identifying it so that people would feel as comfortable as possible. So I appreciate staff's willingness to be flexible on this and helping us ensure that we can solicit as much feedback as possible while maintaining confidentiality. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely heard. John, see your hand.
Yeah, and I would echo that too. And I'd also thank the many people that gave input into the process, the public comments and staff's work on this. So we do need it to be useful. We do need stakeholders to feel comfortable giving information, but we also need to be sensitive to the information we're requesting. So I appreciate the fact that we can take this back and get it to where we need it to be. The one comment that I would also echo is that what is the dispersal method to get this out to as many people as possible? I guess we need to get as much feedback as we can for it to be useful for us, please.
Yeah, I believe primary right now, the intention is to, when posted online, and then we have a variations of emails throughout industry with contacts. So, and then with the encouragement to also forward on the survey for anybody else. So, we're still figuring out the fine details of that, but it is in the intention to try to get it dispersed as possible. Yes, Laura, I see your hand up.
So once again, the timeline, we will be formalizing it next month in March. And then you'll have about a month you'll send it out, and then the responders will have about a month. So we'll be getting the information back in May, April.
Yeah, or sooner. We're still trying to figure out the actual details. A lot of it depends on the subset list. So how many drugs are going to be on the subset list, how long the carriers will need to kind of fill out some of that stuff. So we're trying to see if the alignment should be specifically with the data call, or if, because these are surveys and volunteered, to shorten up that so that staff has more time in the front end to analyze the feedback. And then once the data call comes in, we have the time to focus on that. Again, there's only a couple of people working on any part of the analysis, and so we don't want to be bogged down during the primary couple months in May, June, especially with the generic drug report having to come out and all these other things. So there's a lot of work that's coming up for us in a very small team. Yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Well, and Courtney, speaking of the small team, I do want to thank staff for including this and for the efforts on it, because I do think this is going to make the information that are part of our affordability packets is going to give the board members a much more comprehensive view of kind of what's going on in each ecosystem related to any particular drugs in reference. So I appreciate this is a big lift for the team, but I do think it's going to make a meaningful impact in the affordability review process. So thank you very much for your efforts on this.
Yes, and well, again, I couldn't do a lot of this without being able to work with the board members and the collaboration that they provided me over the last few weeks with this. And then again, all the public comments that are coming in, we do appreciate those, and we'll provide those changes and edits, over the next couple of days. Oh, Robert, I saw your hand up and then down. I said it for you. Okay, thanks. So I didn't see any feedback or recommendations regarding any questions to be changed for this scientific and medical trained community. So I'm going to go on to the manufacturer, if there's anything under the manufacturer drug RFI. And if none there, then we're going to jump down to patient caregivers, advocacy groups, and the general public. Again, I know we got some really great feedback on this. Thank you to those advocacy groups that took the time to really provide some detailed information for us to kind of look at and consider, and we'll shore these up for better review for next month. And then scrolling down, we have PBM information. And then lastly, the safety net providers. Again, thank you, Marty Carty, for your email on this, and we will apply additional information around your feedback on this. So, going forward, just appreciate the high level information. We will bring this back. We just wanted to get it out in public to get the feedback and the information, which everybody has been kind to provide, and we will have a more fruitful discussion on this next month. So Robert, before I log off,
Yeah, just a quick question. I was looking for my notes on this, so it took me a while to find them, but on I'm not sure it's on every form, but on most of the form, it's used one form per drug reference in the instructions. But you have a requirement on some of the lists for the NDC 11 code. So how is that relationship supposed to work? If you have a drug that has multiple NDCs,
mm-hmm.
do you fill this out for each NDC? Is that repetitive? Because there seems to be an inconsistency between the instructions and what the form is asking for.
Yeah, well, probably. So this again, the thinking through the process, right? And why getting additional feedback just outside of what staff says is doing. We see most of the drugs right now at the NDC level, so it'd be great to be able to capture more of that. But we know it's a big lift. I think if anything, getting the drug at the proprietary name or non-proprietary name, so that because we know what NDC is associated with what drug is going to be reviewed. So basically, it's just ensuring that we're capturing the correct drug name for review. But I'm happy to listen to any suggestions from the board members who to kind of shore this up or make it easier for analysis, so that when we develop those packets, all the information is consistent or as meaningful as possible for the board to review. Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Courtney. So obviously Mr. Judge raises a really good point. And to your point, we should be knowing exactly which NDCs in reference, but maybe just a simple way in the RFI is to just ask the manufacturers themselves to include any NDCs, because obviously we know different package sizes and things. I mean, maybe we could just simply ask the manufacturer to say, hey, can you give us your NDCs associated with this drug? Maybe that's just an efficient way for us to do that.
Okay.
Or go for NDC 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
The NDC 9, that's a good point.
Appreciate that feedback. All right. Well, I believe we have our marching order to how we're going to do this. So Chair Bailey, I will hand it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Courtney, for helping us through this process. We are now moving into an executive session. The Prescription Drug Affordability Board will now adjourn to executive session pursuant of ORS 192.6602F, which allows the board to meet in closed session to consult with counsel concerning legal advice. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience may not attend. Representatives of the news media are directed not to report on otherwise disclose anything said during the executive session. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, the board will return to open session and welcome the audience back. The audience may stay in the Zoom room until the board returns. The board will return to open session in approximately 10 minutes. Melissa, if you could please help facilitate telling board members how we can access the executive session, I would very much appreciate it.
I'm going to open the meeting room right now, and you should automatically be sent to the room. So we'll give that a try.
We will all hang on.
Thank you.
Hello, I would like to welcome everyone back to the meeting. I would like to return to open session and roll call. Executive session has ended and the board has returned to open session. We will begin with roll call. I do see a hand raised though before that for our interpreter. I do want to make sure that we answer what the interpreter for the session needs. Melissa, can you help facilitate that before we call roll?
Yes, and Pamela, I did just change your settings, so thank you for your patience with that.
And if you want to remove your hand raise, perfect. Thank you very much. So Melissa, can you please call roll related to returning to open session?
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Present.
Vice Chair Amy Burns.
Present.
Dan Hartung is at a class. Lori Hoagland.
Present.
Robert Judge.
Present.
Chris Lehman.
Present.
John Murray.
Present.
Dan Kennedy.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay, Melissa, thank you very much. And for everyone listening in today, I do want to mention that we are tabling the discussion of the carrier template for our next meeting in March. So that will be an agenda item for our March meeting. And we are continuing our discussion related to OAR 925-200-100 related to the board review of data sets. So one of the purposes of PDAB is to conduct affordability reviews on prescription drugs and insulin products. Today, the board will review preliminary lists of prescription drugs and insulin for the affordability reviews. The preliminary lists are posted on the PDAB website, and links are included in today's agenda materials. I call on Courtney Whitlock, Senior Policy Analyst, to lead us in this discussion.
Great,
Courtney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I'm going to share my screen, so please give me a moment. All right, I know that I've shared this a few times, but I think it's really important to remember that this is the scope of work under our ORA 925-200-0010 rule, also shortly abbreviated as the -10 rule. The intention under the rule is to remove drugs that do not meet this criteria or that do not meet the affordability review information. I'm going to show in a minute the carrier drug list. We'll start with that if the board wants to. We could also start with the insulin, but after last month's discussion, the carrier drug list seemed to be a higher priority. So we'll start with that. And then kind of drilling down through discussion points of how the board wants to start drilling out the drugs that don't meet the requirement for affordability review. So before I jump in, again, I just want to provide a highlight that this is an advisory board. We do not have upper payment limit authority. This is strictly to look at carrier data information that was provided to PDAB through various drug price transparency program reporting requirements that capture the top 25 greatest price increase, the most costly and most prescribed drugs. And included in that is the most expensive drugs. That's a different analysis that the staff does to show the most expensive prescription cost. And then also in the packet, we just highlighted the full rule because the slide had cut off the insulin requirements. So when we look at insulin, we primarily look at the overall spend, patient spend, and patient out-of-pocket cost. Again, these are all posted online. These are all the links, the carrier, the insulin, and the manufacturer reported information. I'm gonna go back up here so you can toggle between the two. So last month, Chair Bailey had suggested that all board members please take the time to interact with the spreadsheet to kind of understand how the rule removal process works. I wanted to point out to the board that we worked with our clinician and they went through and I determined that some of the biosimilar the therapeutic equivalent and biosimilar categorizations for some of the drugs were in alignment with what is actually available. And then they also indicated the number of either the therapeutic equivalent or the biosimilar that's also similar to the therapeutic alternative drugs. So because that's one of the requirements here to look at, therapeutic alternative available based off of the number. You can also now look at therapeutic equivalent drug and biosims. We can start off with that kind of conversation to drill out any drugs that may have a certain number of biosimilars or more. So if we look at these, we have biosimilars ranging from 1 to 22, then a handful that do not have therapeutic equivalents. And then here on the biosimilars, it's 1 through 10. So is there any like drill down or removal recommendations for either two of those columns to consider? And also for the therapeutic alternatives, we have up to 14. So again, the question is, do you want to start looking at the drill down of numbers, knowing that a drug that has more than 5 to 6 therapeutic equivalents or biosims create market competition? We can remove the ones that have a higher number of therapeutic equivalents or biosims as our first drill down. Another decision the board I'd like to ask the board is, last year the board removed drugs that were being reviewed under the IRA CMS list. If the board is interested in removing any of those drugs from 2024 and the current list that was submitted in 2025, keeping in mind that the CMS list is based primarily around the Medicare population. So it's a much narrower population versus this is commercial based information, still showing some sort of impact on the system and possibly patient out-of-pocket cost. So those are two kind of areas to start with, or just to consider. This isn't about like, you know, what you discussed today or suggest today is the going to be the expected process. Just need to start looking at how to drill out drugs that don't meet the review criteria. Yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I mean, so one of the thoughts I have related to IRA, my own personal opinion would be to remove drugs for both years that have been published, but make sure we note them in the report in our final report, that we would note, hey, these ones were not looked at because essentially the federal government's looking at them. We recognize they're not representative of Oregon, you know, entirely, they're Medicare, but for purposes of shining light on things, we decided to remove them. That's just a personal thought I had. Related to starting to drill down our universe, I mean, at least one way I was looking at it was actually to start with possibly kind of going through it, really kind of first focusing on like the cost per year, like starting there and looking at it, and then maybe looking at impacted carriers before we went into the therapeutic equivalent or biosimilar. I'm not a clinician, so there may be a reason to focus on therapeutic equivalent or biosimilar first. So I would welcome my colleagues' input on that. But that was one way I was trying to look at it when I was trying to fulfill the task that I asked my colleagues to also do.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. So again, if you go to total annual net of rebate,
yeah,
to categorize that, or just the smallest. You know,
again, the next way I was personally looking at it was to then look at the number of carriers and the number of enrollees. But again, it doesn't mean that's the way to do it, but I welcome my colleagues' thoughts.
And just to follow up with what you just said, so the number of carriers, the larger number of carriers represents a possible impact to the system,
Yeah.
which means that the drug price is affecting all carriers reporting.
That was my intention. My intention was to try to look past plan design. I mean, obviously plan design is a critical piece of this, but my personal thoughts had been the more carriers impacted, the more likely it might be to be something to look at. But I see Vice Chair Dr. Burns has her hand raised.
Yeah, I would again advocate for deprioritizing medications that have a therapeutic equivalent or a biosimilar. We're looking at 2023 data. So Humira didn't really have a lot on the market then, but it's 2025 now and they do. So to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to look at things where there's already a lower cost bioequivalent alternative. So I really think we should take that into consideration.
Do you have a suggested number when Courtney showed the drill down? Do you have any suggestion of how she might, what
Well,
number?
I mean, it's tricky, right? As you know, like when things lose their patent and there's competition that comes to the market, sometimes there is a period of exclusive access for one manufacturer over, just general availability for other manufacturers to put out the same medication in a generic or biosimilar form. So that's a tricky one. I mean, if we needed to put a number on it, we could. But just the fact that there's an alternative at all, to me, is in theory opens the door for competitive pricing, and that should lower costs compared to something that's just exclusive and has one price point.
Looks like Courtney's helping us do that right now. Mr. Judge, while Courtney's doing that, you have the floor. But we cannot hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bailey. I'm aligned with what Dr. Burns is suggesting. If there's alternatives within a class, I think that makes that drug a candidate for inclusion. When I think about the threshold, you're right. Once there's an alternative available, it does introduce the potential for competition and some changes. But what I've seen just in experience is that you have to get at least 2 market players as alternatives out there before you start seeing some shifts in kind of pricing. So I would, if we were forced to say a number, I would say at least 2, 3's definitely when you start seeing it. And that covers both biosims as well as generics just generally. Just my observation.
So apologies, Robert, the intention would be to remove them with 1 or 2, or to keep the ones that have 1 or 2?
I think for the board, you'd have to have at least 2 or more.
Okay.
So.
Two or more for the competition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It didn't really remove too many. So.
Which is not bad.
Dr. Lehman?
Yeah.
Robert, did I misunderstand? Because I thought you were saying if there are more than 2 therapeutic alternatives, we would take them off the list.
Oh, no.
Yes.
No, what I'm saying is if we're seeing a lot of utilization of a particular drug with a high cost threshold to it, and there's a lot of therapeutic alternatives, that's a candidate for review.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any other suggestions? We can go back to, again, we're still looking at total spend. I'm not sure. Anything associated with any of the carriers, if it's only 1 or 2 or 3 carriers.
I would think we'd want to filter by highest number of carriers impacted, in my opinion.
Okay, so then we'd want to remove.
But Robert, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on that, Chair Bailey. The thing that just sticks with me is the annual net spend per enrollee.
Oh.
That's where you start saying, hey, it's affecting individuals, either through cost share arrangements or from a planned payer perspective, regardless of whether it's 1 carrier or 14 carriers.
So would you rather have it drilled out to enrollees to show
I mean, I agree with Robert that total annual net spend per enrollee is a critical piece. When I was ranking the number of carriers, I guess I was making that part of it, but total spend seems to be something we very much need to focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at this data, so here we just highlighted from largest to smallest, but only 2 carriers reported it. So that might be contracting information versus, you know, and plan design placement versus an actual impact on, you know, yeah.
Which, unlike last year, with our RFIs going out, we are trying to lean more into getting more information related to plan design, right?
In some category,
right?
For the in the data template call, in the data template. So again, I know some of these are kind of challenging, but if we go back to the rule again, you know, looking at you know, is the drug a brand or generic? If the board only wants to review brand drugs, you know, I can pull, see what just the generics would look like, or what the impact, the cost for some of the generics, therapeutic alternatives, any patent exclusivity, like how long the drug has been on the market. So those are just to provide some guidance to the board. Is there a preference to the board if you would rather look at just generics or, I mean, sorry, just brand drugs, or is generics and brands the intention of this year's review? Because last year, the generics were removed from review.
Are there, and I didn't sort on this, but is there a way to sort on high cost generics to see if it's
Yeah.
a dollar threshold that's worth worrying about?
I can do that for you. So these are just the generics being shown, and per enrollee, these are the tops. Overall spend. These are the tops.
My personal opinion would be to remove generics, because when you look at the drugs relative to what's on our brand list and total annual spend net of rebate per prescription, from my perspective, it seems that we should first start with what Dr. Burns' recommendation was related to therapeutic alternatives and Mr. Judge's filtering related to that. Next, filtering at average cost net of rebate per prescription.
All right.
Which I think is what we had right before we talked about generics.
Yeah, so this is only for generics. So these are the generic drugs that are the top contributor, based off of the average cost per prescription. So does that mean that you do want to remove the generic drugs then and only look at brand?
I think
Well, Chair Bailey, I would say I don't think that needs to be an absolute
No,
question.
none of
If
this
there
is
is a
absolute.
cut line, correct. So I just want to make sure the board members are clear.
From my perspective, I was just brainstorming with my colleagues. I was not
Sure.
making cut decisions. And I guess some of that related, looking at the line item, you know, on row 27, I mean, so I guess some of that discussion kind of also is related to orphan status and things, and what we come to as a board related to that too. So yeah, everything I was suggesting was not a final decision by any means, but just an intention to encourage dialogue among my peers.
Yeah, and talking about orphan drugs, we did receive some public comments that some designations were kind of on an oversight. We're going to go back and double check all the orphan drug designations. And again, according to the statute, you know, being challenged with reviewing drugs with the orphan designation, the ones that are already here, again, is it remove the orphan drugs from review? Or are there drugs that are orphan designated that the board would like to potentially review? Because under our rule -020, there is the ability to look at drugs for other indications outside of the orphan designation.
So just for clarity, oh, Dr. Burns.
Oh, just really quickly, because I saw, can you put it back up there, Courtney? It looks like there's a couple of orphan drug designations that are listed for something like budesonide or fluticasone. And I'm pretty sure that that's going to be really related to route of administration. So that wouldn't necessarily, not that we want to add these, take those off the table, but that's something to take into consideration too, when we're looking at this really particularly nuanced, what do we do with orphan drugs? Because that's something we could probably really actually, when it comes to route for the formulation, be able to carve up what's actually has that orphan designation, what doesn't. I don't know if that'll actually be applicable, but that's something to take, into consideration.
Okay. That would entail us going back and having to look at the drug and the administrative route and add that in.
Right. And so your clinical SME would be able to do that pretty easily.
Yeah. So then is there another way to look at the drill down, or is the board wanting to follow what Dr. Burns is saying, where you would rather have it split out to determine what is orphan based off of the administrative process? Yeah, Chair Bailey.
I mean, it seems to me before we ask board staff to go to that level of work, I mean, I do just want to kind of share, at least from my perspective, that on this spreadsheet, when we have the simple yes or no related to has orphan designation, that's solely information from the FDA for the approved indication, right? But then after that, there's a whole lot of other things that go into it. So I would just hate to ask staff to do more, except maybe just kind of look at some of the information that we've received. But on the generic side, I would almost want to wait unless one of those drugs met our other criteria that we might have, just so that you don't go back and do a bunch of work if those drugs didn't already come up on other columns that were important to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, when you looking at this right here, like this is pretty cut and dry. These are all gonna shake out as orphan, but there might be a couple here or there. I don't know. It's yeah, I don't want to create more work for you, Courtney.
But I do think the orphan discussion, right, is something that we should be having as peers, right? Because this spreadsheet, to my understanding, is just showing the approved indication.
The designated. So there's a difference between the designated approved, because those are the drugs that have like the 7-year exclusivity, versus the approved, which has the permanent approval for it. So it's the statute indicates designated drugs, but there's kind of gray areas when it comes to the approval drugs. So all these that are listed, yes, have a designation, which means that it meets the FDA statutory requirement for the 7-year exclusivity and a couple other components to it. So we can, again, look at some of the drugs that are only FDA designated and remove those. Or take time and kind of look through them to see if there's any drugs that kind of fall under this, where it may have an approved FDA indication, but the other indications to it can still be considered. But again, we'd have to go back and really look at how much of the utilization of that drug happened. We'd have to really conceptualize where we're going to get that and how we're going to justify that. Robert, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two ways to go about this. Where we know there's a designation, which is, listed as yes, you could pretty affirmatively say those should be removed, regardless of whether that designation is based upon the indication for which that orphan status was assigned, or whether because I just don't know how we get to in kind of our data, how we get it to an indication from our database. So I think it'd be, it's not the ideal, but I don't know another way to kind of get at this. We'll kind of have to use a blunt instrument, I would think. The question I thought you were teeing up, Courtney, was for those where it's none listed, we may have drugs in there that have not yet affirmatively received their orphan designation. But we're now 2 years down the road. We're 2 years later. And so you may have drugs within those categories that have an orphan designation. And that would raise the same sort of question as how do you look at our data and parse it out? So I think we have to use a blunt instrument when we look at the orphan designation. Unfortunately, today.
And that was going to be my comment as well. I agree with Mr. Judge on that topic. So
I know this isn't necessarily easy, but does this board have any structure or ways that you would like to look at the orphan drugs? I mean, we know the statutory requirements and the rule requirements, and how this has been set up is any drug that has a designation is indicated yes. But before, I want to acknowledge Chris Lehman's hand up, and Robert, your hand. So.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, Chris.
No, I just agree with Robert and John, and yeah, the challenges created in assessing the data and really getting at what the indications are that things are being used for is just too much. And I would agree that we should remove the orphan designated drugs from the list.
Okay, well, let's see what that would look like. Let me just do a quick count. So we have 158 drugs. If we removed the yes, and again, we're going to go through and there might be some more that are going to be knocked off. We're going to double check all the non-listed ones again due to the feedback from. So now that takes us to 95 drugs. We can do that first filter. How's the board feel with that? Start there. Is there any other drill outs that the board would like to consider? And again, we're still being filtered on the average costs.
It looks like Lori and Robert had their hand raised. I think Robert, you were first.
Chair Bailey, your hand's raised though.
Oh, you're so kind. No, I guess the one thing I was wanting to mention is this is for a discussion, I guess, at a later time and a later day, later in the year. But that, this I guess shows where in the future we may want to make recommendations that open the scope of things that we can do. And I just want to make sure that on our roadmap for the year, that's a discussion that we do have later this year, so that moving forward, we might have more flexibility in the future. So I just wanted to put that on the record, but I do believe, Mr. Judge, your hand was raised.
Sure. So thank you, Chair Bailey. So just to be clear, Courtney, right now we have it filtered on orphan and on therapeutic alternatives, or is it just on orphan? That gives you the 98. So
Yeah, so I went back, I can do it off of the therapeutic alternatives again.
and that limits it pretty significantly, right?
To
No?
63.
63. So we lost about 25. Got it.
So, and I see Lori's hand up. Did you have a suggestion, Lori?
Well, I support what other people have said about the orphan drugs. And I also wanted to bring up the number of enrollees in terms of the impact. It seems to me that the more people who are on the medicine, if we selected, we would have a bigger effect on, affordability across the state.
And so what would your suggestion be to?
Well, I don't know how the categories, you'd have to show me how they're arranged. But if there's 1,000 enrollees on a medicine versus 20, to me, we're going to have a bigger impact when we're selecting our first group of medicines if we select them based on, maybe eliminating all of the drugs less than 50.
Which actually, Laura, you do bring up a good point about a filtration component that we talked about last year. So, most prescribed drugs, there's a categorization where it just to filter out drugs that are only for most prescribed. We can look at doing that like we did last year, since the concern is that most prescribed drugs are mostly affordable. They're just the most prescribed. If I was to filter that for you, basically, you're looking at 5, 6 drugs that only have the most prescribed. So is that a filtration opportunity to consider for a board? Or is the most prescribed a significant data point for affordability review?
Personally, I feel like that after seeing it, I appreciate the intention, but I don't think I would go back to presenting the data the way we had it previously.
What do you, from last?
I mean, when you filtered it by most prescribed, when we see what comes up as most prescribed, from my personal perspective, I don't think that's what we should be focusing on. I think we saw a lot of lower cost generics, but that's just my own opinion. Ralph, it looks like your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bailey. Just noting, because I know we've got a couple folks that were not with us last year, that we do have vaccines on this list, and we did receive a fair amount of comment and feedback on those last year. So would invite you, and maybe Burns has a good memory. But to that point, if folks want to have conversation about the appropriateness of vaccines on these lists, we could certainly do that as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Ralph, because I was going to suggest that we perhaps take off the vaccines or consider filtering them out to see what that looks like. And my other thought would be the HIV meds as well, based on a lot of the feedback that we've received. And that's not something we necessarily have to do, but like looking at the list, if we were to take out those. And so that would be like Odefsey, Biktarvy, Triumec, those would be the 3 that would be HIV meds.
Well, and I guess Dr. Burns, related to that specifically, I do want to make sure to remind everyone that information was presented to us about some of these medications. So as Courtney referenced earlier, we will be updating this list because it does look like there are drugs that we might see before us right now that do have an orphan indication. So Courtney alluded to it earlier that we would be re-reviewing the list, but I just want to make sure to reinforce that for the record.
So I guess kind of how we filtered out based off of Dr. Burton's suggestions. So these are the antivirals and the vaccines. Kind of taking a look, number of carriers it's impacted. Primarily brands. Most have some sort of therapeutic alternatives to them. So happy to consider removing any of those. I do see Chris Lehman's hand up.
Yeah, I support that decision, Courtney. I think those are appropriate things to filter out. Robert and Dr. Burns, I did have a question. I'm not totally sure I understand why we would filter out the agents that don't have therapeutic alternatives or only have one therapeutic alternative. Why would we not want those on the list?
My argument was that we would only look at those that don't have any
Yeah, that's what
therapeutic alternative or biosimilar.
That was the way I understood it too, but I think the way Courtney filtered it only showed us ones that had more than.
Oh, maybe that was just to see the amount.
Oh, how
I'm
long
not sure.
the list of that was. Okay.
Yeah.
I got it. So
Yeah.
the ones that have a bunch of therapeutic alternatives.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me to look at something like Humira, which has got, 15 biosimilars on the market.
We don't need to
right
talk
now.
about it. I agree with that 100%.
Let's ask Mr. Judge though, because I do think he had a different stance. So Mr. Judge, can you clarify?
Oh, and you're on mute.
Where I was initially going was looking at candidates for an evaluation where there was a therapeutic alternative available. And then it triggered, well, how many therapeutic alternatives do you need to include to make it worth including? And my logic being that you really see competition when you have more than one, two or greater. And if because the mental model I had was if you have competition out there and we still see these categorical standouts on the brand or the originator product, there's something that bears some investigation because the therapeutic options that are available are not options that are being considered. So that's why that's the brain thought I was going through. Not to say, hey, if there's if there's a categorical, if there's a therapeutic alternative in the category, that we would filter off of it. I was just trying to look at it from, seeing if there are a number of alternatives out there, but we still have a lot of spend in the category. There's something at play here.
And I would like to jump in and say, Mr. Murray, after your comment, I would like to be mindful of our interpretation services we have and likely conclude the meeting. So Mr. Murray, you have the floor.
I was just going to comment on my thoughts of removing the vaccines. They're generally well covered and don't have a lot of issues with cost to a patient. Also, we've got a lot of information back or comments back on the HIV medications, their exclusion in other states and PDAB boards and things, and I would support removing them as well. Moving on to IRA medications, the Medicare delisted ones, I would probably support removing them as well, because I believe that even though it does apply to Medicare only, it does tend to change the cost of the medication for other areas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my impression, that it does reduce the cost to all entities that are buying it, whether they're commercial or otherwise. And then to go to generics I rarely see a cost issue for people. If we could, I'm not sure how others feel about it, but if we remove generics off the list that have multiple therapeutic alternatives, we pare it down a fair bit.
Courtney, I know I've been making some of that real time. I do want to make sure to remind everyone listening in today that this is part of our iterative discussion, and that concluding the meeting where we have concluded it today does not mean that that's, you know, exactly the process we're following, but this is just part of our discussions related to this, and we will be continuing these discussions in our next meeting. So moving forward, I do want to reference that our next board meeting is March 19th at 9 a.m. And with there being no further business before the board, all in favor of adjourning, please say yes.
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 Any opposed, please say no. All right, well, I look forward to seeing everyone next month, March 19th, 2025 at 9 a.m. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
I guess that's ended.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See ya.